Sometime in 2018, there were reports of a large ship sailing stealthily in the ocean along the wild coast. There was allegedly plenty of activity both on and off board, but the ship didn't attract much attention. The ship appeared again in 2020. In October 2021, a small announcement was published that multinational oil giant Shell would conduct seismic drilling along the wild coast, commencing from the 1st of December over a period of 5 to 6 months, covering the coastline from Port St. John's to Morgan Bay. If you blinked, you would have missed the announcement, but the media, coastal communities and activists noticed it, and thus began a widespread civil society protest of seismic proportions.
The wild coast, it's very, very important to the nation because we all depend into this ocean and also to the marine life.
On the 28th of December 2021, the Makhanda High Court imposed a temporary interdict on the company. On the 30th of May, Shell appeared at the Quebec court to overturn the interdict.
The furor that is around the seismic survey, we believe that there's limited understanding that exists in terms of how safe this process is.
The ruling is expected in 3 months' time, but the debate rages on.
We are all utilizing this ocean. So as you talk about swimmers and divers and people that strictly depends into the ocean, for an example, fishermen, they're not employed, but they're only working in this ocean.
Nkobile Jojo is a Port St. John's lifeguard. We previously brought you his story of heroism and his desire to assist his community despite inadequate support and infrastructure. Known as the Port St. John's ambassador, he is also an environmental activist.
We need to keep on educating our kids and brothers that we must look after, because conservation is not about myself, but we all conservationists at the end of the day.
According to Stats SA, in South Africa, marine tourism ranks among the top 4 sectors of the country's marine and economic pillars, projected to generate up to 1 million jobs by 2033.
Got an event called the Sardine Run. The Sardine Run is the only event that took place in the wild coast. So we have international tourists that comes to Port St. John's to dive. So once they will continue blasting the ocean for 6 months. Lots of people will lose jobs.
In fact, 1 in 22 South Africans work in the tourism sector, and it employs more people than mining. But Shell insists seismic explorations will provide the necessary fuel for the wild coast's future.
Communities around the wild coast, they'll have opportunities to have small businesses that support the activities that are going on there. As I've already said, is that there will also be jobs created.
They talk about how many billions the oil business would make, but who knows how many billions of livelihood are the coastal communities deriving every year, every day, every month from the ocean? And who cares? No one cares about that because it's all about profiteering.
Since 1976, there's been at least 35 seismic surveys that have been done in South Africa. And this is done in a manner that is very much in line with global standards. We strongly and firmly believe that there hasn't been enough evidence that says there is harm to the environment, there is harm to the marine mammals.
By no means do we know exactly what the impact is, but we're starting to see more and more evidence of the negative impacts.
Seismic surveys use sound waves to scan the ocean floor for fossil fuels. In the last 10 years, technology has made discoveries not only on species close to the shores, but in deeper waters.
And it's revealing that these deep water ecosystems are every bit as varied as the shallow ones. And we need to be able to protect a range of those. We don't even know a lot of the animals that live there. And when you're looking at animals that grow to maybe hundreds of years old, one set of damage to destroy it's going to take a long, long time to recover. Let's protect them before we destroy them.
Both the blue ecosystem and the green economy could also be impacted.
Any economic activity that is going to degrade the land, the ecosystem, the ocean, which is the source of livelihood for the people cannot be viewed as a development, because at the end of it all, it's about who benefits and who is going to suffer, who's going to live with the cost of that.
Sinegugu Zukulu is an environmentalist at the forefront of preserving and promoting not only the coastal blue and green economies, but the rights of indigenous communities. He was part of the Amadiba Crisis Committee that in 2018 succeeded in halting Australian mining company MRC from extracting titanium from Kolobeni in the Wild Coast. This community joined forces with Port St John's and other coastal communities to block Shell's seismic exploration.
We are opposing this for various reasons, and one is our right to self-determination, our constitutional right to a safe and healthy environment protected for sustainable development.
South Africa has 42 marine protected areas, or MPAs, legislated by the Department of Environmental Affairs, including along the Ponderland Wild Coast.
A marine protected area is a part of the coastline or the ocean that is specially legislated for conservation. And we liken them to the Kruger National Parks of the ocean. We want to protect the marine biodiversity, but we want people to benefit as well.
Shell has undertaken not to interfere with these precious MPAs.
Even if some extraction happens outside of a marine protected area where it's legal, if there is a spill or something like that, the impacts are going to be felt in the protected area. And that's just one of the things that we have to think about when we do the risk assessments.
Just south of Port St John's, along the stretch of coastline between the town and Morgan Bay, where Shell wants to conduct seismic explorations, is the rural hamlet of Mgazana. It is surrounded by mangrove forests, estuaries and deltas. These are already experiencing irreparable losses due to climate change, land invasions and deforestation.
We are boasting the third biggest natural mangrove estuary in the world, and one of the unique saltwater mangrove estuary, which has such unique biodiversity of flora, fauna, fish. Why would we want to come and destroy our beautiful environment? And we'll leave our place in a mess and in ruin.
Shefli King is a musician, doctor and sangoma. He lives in Mgazana with his family and understands the struggles of his traditional community.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done to uplift our communities. But the key question is how the world and developed countries are speaking of clean living and renewable energy and sustainable development. Why should they insist on carrying on with their seismic, the devastation it will cause to the ocean?
Not only are there reserves of oil and gas in the sea, but also untapped titanium along these unspoiled beaches. And it is here that we encounter a tragic sight. Of course, it could be coincidental, but given the growing global research on the impact of seismic drilling to marine species, this sight is all the more alarming. A dead turtle with no visible signs of injury washed ashore.
We shall still continuing because I think this is evident, because when they stopped the court, the appeal, when they lodged the appeal, they already had been doing this. And we didn't know, so how do we know now that they're stopped? How do we know?
Could this be a micro glimpse into the future of the Wild Coast? Shell insists seismic explorations along the Wild Coast will not harm the environment and marine life.
We have this goal zero approach to safety. If at any stage we believe that what we do and what we are about to do will cause harm to the environment, we wouldn't do it.
The company also emphasizes its compliance with South African laws and global standards in its commitment to reducing greenhouse gases according to the Paris Agreement of 2015 and COP26. But although South Africa is a signatory to these agreements, according to global research, South Africa emits more greenhouse gases than any country in Africa.
As a nation, we should really be looking at renewable energy. We should be looking at alternatives to oil and gas. There is no doubt that if we continue on this drive to use oil and gas as an energy source, as a society, as a world, we are going to face such difficult times.
We've got our own guidelines, but we also take the guidelines of the country where we operate in terms of how to operate. So we will review and we continuously review our position on exploration and new frontiers.
But there are questions surrounding the South African politics of the oil business and the oily business of politics.
When you look at the construction of the various companies involved in the search for oil, and you look at who the major stakeholders happen to be and their shareholders, and then you trace their origins back to where they are seated in government or in controlling bodies, then the answer is pretty clear.
The ANC does not have shares in Shell. Tebe Investments Corporation owns 28% of Shell, and then the 72% is owned by Shell PLC.
But there are overlapping interests between the stakeholders listed below: Tebe, Operation Phakisa, Impact Oil, Shell South Africa, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and the ANC's Batu Batu Trust. Tebe regards the ANC as its major investor. It began investing in Shell in 2002. In 2015, it merged with downstream Shell.
It is concerning when you have a ruling party choose to support the so-called investors, even if that is disregarding the constitutional rights of the people.
The investment arm of the ANC, the Batu Batu Trust, owns over 51% of Tebe. During the third quarter of the 2022 financial year, through the new Political Party Funding Act, the Batu Batu Trust was compelled to disclose its 15 million rand donation to ANC coffers. In fact, the ANC is the sole beneficiary of the Batu Batu Trust.
Shell is just one incident of all of the rot that seems to permeate Southern Africa. But nobody is being held accountable for this. And while they're not being held accountable, everything is falling to pieces. And while this is happening, greed, which has absolutely no boundaries, is running rampant.
Since 2014, Shell's role in South Africa has been lubricated by Operation Phakisa. This was former President Jacob Zuma's ambitious project to fast-track the National Development Plan, which included opening the ocean's economy to offshore oil and gas mining.
The Marine Spatial Planning Bill, which is the bill that is used for the oil and gas exploration for Operation Phakisa, for the so-called blue economy. The law that actually gives the government authority to subdivide the ocean into pockets and sites that they give to this exploration. In other words, it opens the ocean's economy for the investors, for people to come in and apply for that block.
Our National Environmental Management Act, or NEMA, requires companies to get authorization for seismic surveys. But barreling ahead with Operation Phakisa also allegedly required a watering down of the more strict environmental regulations. In terms of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Act, Shell only needed an environmental management program, not an environmental impact assessment.
Currently, the legislation says that you do not need a full environmental impact assessment for a seismic survey, and I think that we need to change that. So we need to really look at the legislation.
The very fact that the court found against Shell is an indication of paucity on the part of the governance.
What's needed is an overhaul of our entire legislation with respect to seismic surveys.
Another major stakeholder in the seismic survey is Impact Oil, a British-based multinational oil and gas company whose Canadian counterpart, Africa Energy Corp, also has a significant fossil fuel footprint in southern Africa. Former trade union leader and ANC stalwart Johnny Copeland is director of both companies. He is also the CEO of Hoskin Consolidated Investments, a company whose diverse interests include offshore fossil fuel exploration. We approached Mr. Copeland for an interview, but he declined.
The country is no longer ruled by the ministers and the party in charge. Every decision has to go along to be ratified in the courts purely by the fact that they do not follow due procedure.
In 2014, Impact Oil secured the original prospecting rights for the Wild Coast, but did not exercise them until 2020, when it invited Shell to partner with it, causing the outcry.
Shell and the local response to their seismic exploration is the first example that I've seen of civil society standing up and saying enough.
Opposition to Shell, Impact Oil and the Department of Mineral Resources is also due to the lack of consultation with indigenous communities.
We were not consulted. Even if we were consulted, we still oppose this.
Today, according to the South African Association of Biological Research, over 90% of South Africa's coastline has been carved up for gas and oil exploration.
You have at the core of this profiteering and greediness and all of that is the corporates who come and promise people everything.
Shell would benefit because the company is a commercial company and does things to make profits. However, the fiscus of this country would benefit greatly. Communities around the Wild Coast, they'll have opportunities. So the benefits are really wide-ranging and they are really worth exploring.
Just over an hour away from Port St. John's, also in the former apartheid Bantustan of the Transkei, is the Nyandeni municipality. It too falls under the OR Tambo Municipal District, and like Port St. John's, its administrative town Libode struggles with problems of underdevelopment and unemployment, particularly for the youth.
They don't have access to opportunity, they don't have access to finance, they don't have access to credit, they don't have access to vocational training and management. Now, all of that together will then say to you, look, you don't have a choice, but you need development.
King Ndamasi is the current traditional leader of Western Pondoland. This rural land has retained some semblance of what life was like before colonial rule.
Pondoland was annexed in 1894, but we were never moved away from our land. So our customary system of governance has always been, to a certain extent, I would say, intact.
Our constitution recognizes customary law, but there is sometimes conflict between the powers wielded by traditional leaders and those of a constitutional democracy.
The politicians in parliament are passing laws that are giving traditional leaders authorities that they do not have in terms of the customary laws. A kind of a top-down approach. Traditional leaders, they don't have an authority to make decisions on behalf of the people. It's a consultative process. They rule by consensus. It's a bottom-up process. It's the people who make decisions.
In the wake of the Shell controversy, Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe has been visiting traditional leaders to lobby support for Shell's seismic exploration, including visiting King Ndamasi in April this year.
All we need as traditional leaders is involvement when it comes to projects like this. As long as the community at the end will benefit, and secondly, it won't destroy our natural beauty.
The business people who are looking to make profit, they approach whoever that is said to have power to sign, to make deals and promise people that they will be enriched.
In 2019, King Ndamasi came under fire for allegedly signing a contract of sorts with a Chinese company. In exchange for land, he was allegedly promised cash and massive developments. He was accused of not consulting his community, an allegation he denies.
When we met this company, they spoke about big development.
It was just reduced in a memorandum of understanding, which is not a legally binding document. It is a document that says these are the intentions of the parties.
From their side, they were saying they have over 100 billion that they have for the development. So we were talking with the company, and there's one thing that I first told them, that I may be called the king, but nothing can be done without consultation with the communities.
The deal was never implemented, possibly because of COVID or because of media exposure. And since then,
has anyone come to you with ambitious proposals that you're considering?
There are people coming with ideas, but there isn't any company where we signed anything.
When you've got investors that have started showing interest in the area, that also gives us hope.
They're welcomed here in Wonderland, but as long as everything that they say they'll do, it's in writing, it must legally bind them, then I think in that way we are safe.
given rising oil prices and the impact of the war in Ukraine, there is an argument being made for extracting our own oil reserves.
As a country, we derive a lot of our energy resources from importation. And this would minimize those importations because we are now all of a sudden self-sufficient. The economy will benefit immensely.
The environment should have far, far greater power, because ultimately the health of the environment is what determines the health of people, and it's what determines the health of the economy.
The impacts of extracting fossil fuels can be felt on the ground, or what's left of it, in countries once rich in resources that have been plundered for profit and reduced to poached earth by corrupt corporations.
The generation that is following is going to inherit nothing. It's a loss of the country's finest assets. And that is the goodwill and the abilities of this marvelous youth that exists out there.
Development must be envisioned by the people who live on that land. It must come, it has got to be bottom-up process.
I do have a message of hope. If we speak and talk and educate people about this is our gold, we need to look after this gold.
What if Shell succeeds in overturning the interdict?
No matter what the outcome is, even if we lose, the world must know that the world shall not live by the oil alone.